Well, good evening, everyone. It is the 5th of April, and this is the evening lesson for tonight in a den of lions, Daniel chapter 6. So if you have a Bible close by, maybe you don't have it close by, you can pause the video. But go and turn to Daniel chapter 6. This is where we're studying from. And there are several different things I'd like for us to notice as we are studying through this part in Daniel chapter 6. The focus of this is to really sort of exegete the passage, but to notice some particulars about the circumstances that Daniel was facing. And to start out with this, we have to recognize the kind of man that Daniel was. This is revealed to us in the first 5 verses of Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaining against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for fault or complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So at this point in Daniel's life, he is a leader. He is the highest ranking official, and the king wants to make him head over the whole kingdom. I mean, to really be second in command only to the king. This is an incredible position of authority that Daniel was in. And whenever you are in a position of authority, you're going to be an example, just like he was, but it can be either a good example or a bad one. But he didn't achieve this ranking, this position, by cutting corners. It was because of his faithfulness and his desire to be pleasing to God and to be of a good reputation among men. There was no maliciousness, there was nothing. It was because of an excellent spirit, verse 3 says. So it's clear that there were no faults that Daniel had. They looked specifically at things that regarded their kingdom, and there was nothing. It's like they tried to do a background check and to check to see if there were anything, if there was a, in our terms, if there was a speeding ticket, if there was something, and there was absolutely nothing on Daniel. And so they said, well, the only way that we can figure anything out is to consider him and his relationship with God. The only possible fault they would ever be able to find would be in connection to God. A lot of people look at Christianity as a fault these days. In and of itself, they think of it as a handicap. They might say things like, who needs God when you have science or philosophy or tolerance? They may say things like, well, Christian or religion was a tool that people used to make sense of things in the world, but we don't need that now. And so they look upon us and think, well, poor blind Christians. They're just blinded by their theology. At the end of the story, we see, in this case with Daniel, the one thing they wanted to convict him about was the one thing that saved his life. I want us to notice next that Daniel's trust in the Lord was greater than the fear of human law. Now, this is sort of a hot topic right now, because of what we're facing. Now, we've been compliant with not meeting for our services because it's a matter of public health. But what if the government did the same thing because they were having a war on religion? Would we be just as easy to send home, or would we still worship and gather together? I want us to notice verses 6 through 10. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever petitioned to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. If we aren't careful, we'll miss how ludicrous this law was. So I want us to notice there, it's just for 30 days. All petitions are made to the king. No other god, no other king, no other man. Just for 30 days. But in those 30 days, if anyone does that, it's the death sentence, really. It's going, put into the den of lions. Now, they did this, and it seems that they've done this for 30 days rather than indefinitely, to make it look like a trial period. It might have made the king more likely to sign. And really, this was all the time that they needed to catch Daniel in the act. Daniel had his windows open toward Jerusalem, and he sat there and he prayed every day, 3 times a day. They knew that he was there, he would do this. So it would be easy to catch Daniel in the act. And that's all they were concerned with. For the king to sign, according to the law of the Medes of the Persians, is making this the highest law of the land. This is irrevocable. And so clearly this is just a trap. And it's almost interesting to note or to ponder, think about how Darius it doesn't say anything about him asking questions or anything. They just came to him and he signed it. And it's interesting that he was kind of in a way made a fool of over this because it was just a ploy to catch Daniel. As we can see, this still wasn't enough to change this man of God. Daniel did just as he had always done. He opened his window to Jerusalem and he prayed to his God every single day. We, in this time period that we're facing this crisis, we need to remember to trust in God and to obey his will, no matter what the circumstances may be. I want us to notice again that Daniel said when it says when Daniel knew that the document had been signed. So Daniel knew about this. He knew that the punishment was death, but he did it anyway. Would we, if the circumstances were different, if our government was pushing us out of our churches because of a war on religion and not for health reasons, would we just as easily begin worshiping in our homes because we're afraid of the consequences? If we were told that we would be put to death, would we just give up on God? It might be easier for us to say, well, no, I wouldn't give up on God. But at the same time, how much are we continuing to do the Lord's work now when the church isn't meeting? And when the church does things to meet virtually, for instance, do we participate in those things? Are we still worshiping the way the Lord has commanded us to? I want us to notice now what human effort does to ruin God's plans. Verses 11 through 18. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that any man or anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Now, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king established can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be charged or changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So Daniel gets caught doing the very thing that they tried to catch him doing. He continued praying just as he did before. And so the king has no choice. As much as we see his desire to free Daniel, this king laboring through the night, not even sleeping over an exile in Judah, we see the kind of love that he had for him. But it was not enough. He had to comply because it was according to their traditions. He had no choice but to follow through. And so Daniel was cast into the lion's den. Now, the University of Minnesota did a study over lion consumption habits. A male lion can eat 95 pounds of meat a day, and a female lion can eat 55 pounds of meat per day. Now, Daniel was thrown into a den of lions. Is an unknown number. We don't know how many there were, but it's clear that there were multiple lions in this den. And they're probably not keeping these animals stuffed either, because this is a means of execution. This is something that they have set in place. It's a part of their traditions and a part of the way that they do things. They presented the law and the king just signed. There weren't any questions asked. And so this killing method, therefore, really promised certain death. I mean, this is about if you think about it, this is about as certain as beheading. If you're thrown into the lion's den, you're not coming out. And especially with a stone sealed at the entrance. But just like the fiery furnace, just a few chapters earlier in Daniel chapter 3, even a pit of lions couldn't spoil God's plans for Daniel. Daniel still had more work to do. God still had more work for Daniel to complete. God has always asked, God has always been active in the lives of his followers, miraculously and in unmiraculous ways. If we think about God's involvement in the book of Esther, God's name isn't even mentioned in that book. But we can see clearly throughout the book that God is involved. The apostles in Acts chapter 5 being delivered from the high priest, they were going to stone them, and then someone stands up and says, now wait a minute, if this is God's plan, then there's no way that we can thwart it. And so instead of killing them, they beat them, and they were on their way to continue to do the Lord's work. And remember Paul being delivered from the Jews multiple occasions, from Felix, from Festus, from Agrippa. In Acts chapter 21, chapter 21 through 26, when Paul was shipwrecked in Acts chapter 27. God was working providentially with all of these people in every one of these cases. And he did so because he wasn't finished with them yet. He still had more plans for their lives. I believe God does the same with all of us. If he has plans for you and you're faithful to him, he's going to be with you so that you can carry them out. And that's absolutely true. There's a reason why we can say proudly, what can man do to me? God is greater than any man, any human law, any lion, and he's going to carry us through. So in this, I want us to also notice what prayer can do. Verses 19 through 23. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Now, in this passage, you can't find the word prayer in these verses. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 33, in the Hall of Fame of Faith, it teaches us that Daniel's faith closed the mouth of the lions. God closed the mouth of the lions, but Daniel had faith that God would protect him. Faith conquered kingdoms. It quenched the power of fire. It put foreign enemies to flight. Yes, God did those things, but God did those things in the faithfulness that others had in him, that he would protect them, that he would guide them, that he would preserve them. When Jonah dwelt in the whale for 3 days, when Jeremiah was cast in the pit, when the apostles were thrown into prison and they prayed, each one of those prayed, I believe Daniel exhibited his faith in the lion's den in the same way, through prayer. I mean, it seems completely unlikely that Daniel spent the entire night in the den of lions and didn't pray a single time. It's likely that he spent the night praying. And this is clear because of what we know about Daniel as a man. Daniel had a consistent prayer life. We go back to verse 10, we know that he prayed. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. One thing that verse teaches us, verse 10, is that he was regular about it. He was so consistent. And in that consistency, he had the same content. It says that he prayed and he gave thanks. Thanksgiving was a part of Daniel's daily petitions to God. Even though he was in exile, he still had cause to be thankful. God allowed him to be in the position that he was in. God was blessing him in other ways that maybe we do not know, but preserving him each day. When it says that he prayed, it indicates in this context that, well, being next to thanks, that he petitioned. He petitioned to God each day. He was asking God for something. We can know that Daniel depended on God daily. And maybe he was, in opening the windows to Jerusalem, he was praying that Jerusalem would be restored. But I'm sure he was also praying for guidance, that God would preserve him and take care of him and be with his people. One thing that we need to note is that Daniel didn't wait for trials to come. He prayed during the good times. Again, he was one of the highest officials under the king. He was going to be second in command only to the king. So he prayed during the good times. And that consistent prayer life built a relationship with God, so that when the lion's den did come, he looked to God, and Daniel said, I found I was blameless before him. I was found blameless. He had a relationship with God. And part of that was that he depended on him. He had daily petitions every single day, multiple times per day, going to the Lord in prayer. Now it's clear that prayer can get you into trouble. Prayer has been looked down upon in many places, been taken out of schools for years. Now, in Moultrie, Georgia, where we live, it's unlikely you'll be getting into trouble in the schools here. I've seen firsthand, teachers encouraging that in their classrooms. But there are those that are getting persecuted because of that. In some schools, it is looked down upon. And the peers especially, they definitely can persecute children because they close their eyes and they pray. And more people are getting offended. I watched a movie one time, and in this movie, a man commented snidely to his wife at dinner. They were out eating, and they saw a couple praying, and he said to her, "Can't we just go out without being proselytized?" I mean, he was just offended by seeing somebody else pray in the restaurant that they were in. It's no secret that this world is becoming more and more intolerant of Christianity. The big movements of our time right now are movements to accept and to honor and to lift high up sins, abortion, and transgenderism, and all of these different things. Those are the big movements of our time. It's not like the big movement of yesteryear of equal rights, civil rights, or women's rights in those times. But now it seems that it's just selfish, and there's sin that's being promoted, and people are becoming more intolerant towards Christianity. Perhaps God included this account in Scripture, knowing what this world would be like, knowing that we would need passages like this to be encouraged that no matter what happens, we need to continue having our faith in God and continue praying even when the world looks down upon it. While prayer can get you into trouble, prayer surely can get you out of trouble. any sort of persecution, any sort of trouble that you might be getting in, for shining your light in prayer is far less threatening when you realize how strong prayer truly is. In prolonging the lives of Daniel and Esther and the apostles and Jeremiah, Jonah, Joshua, Joseph, Job, David, so many others, God supplies example after example of what he can do for us through prayer and through faith. These examples are for us so that we can understand and know that prayer is working. Prayer does work, and it is strong, and it is able to do so much. Many people think asking for help is a sign of weakness, but making petition to God is the strongest thing that we can ever do. And we must surely believe that if we pray like that mountain can be taken up and thrown into the sea, then it surely will. Jesus commanded us to pray in such a way. I think sometimes we go to God in prayer and we go in humility, which is good. We always should go humbly before the Lord. But sometimes we go in such a way that we say, well, Lord, if it's your will, and we say it in such a way as to whether, we have no heart in it. We have no desire for it. We may have a desire for something to happen, and we may pray for it, but we say, Lord, if it's your will, in such a way that we don't truly believe it's going to happen. Jesus told us to pray like a mountain could be taken up and thrown into the sea. That if we truly believe, when we go to God, sometimes, especially in dire situations, we should pray like that thing is going to happen, because we believe that God will do, that he does answer prayers. Now, of course, everything is according to his will. And of course, not all of our prayers are going to be answered the way that we like them to be. But the Bible says so much about praying and God answering what we ask, that's the kind of prayers that we need to have. Asking God to help means asking the creator of the universe to move his hand in your favor. But at the same time, our God loves to hear the prayers of saints. Where do you turn for help each and every day? What do you depend on each day for you to have a life? What is it that keeps you going each and every day? What preserves you? Do you have God in your life? Is he something that you have your faith so strongly rooted in that you can return to him each and every day, and in your prayers be so faithful to him that you have confidence in him each and every day? Daniel is a wonderful example of what it really looks like to be an example in prayer, to be someone who constantly depends upon the Lord. And so we should examine our lives, and we should see, is this the kind of faith that I have? Do I truly believe that the Lord will hear me and listen to me as I pray? Will he protect me? Can I go to him in thankfulness because of the great things that he has done? Certainly we could say yes. But it's our decision now. Will we look at this example and realize what we must do? Thank you for your attention with this video. Thanks for watching. I hope that the scriptures especially were encouraging to you this evening. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.